Hello everybody, this is Miss Asmo with a review on finding the percent of a number. Here are just a few basic guidelines that we need to review first when finding the percent of a number. As we go through, what I want you to get in the habit of doing is estimating first. If you estimate, you have a good idea of what your answer should be about. The next thing that we need to review is that of in math means to multiply. So when we see of, especially when we find the percent of a number, it's telling us to multiply. And then last, we're going to learn the basic idea of finding the percent of a number. Mathematically, all we're going to do is we're going to change our percent to a decimal and then multiply through. Let's take a look at this chart though first. Here's 10% of 54, 10% of 42, 10% of 100. And what we discussed in class is that there's a huge similarity looking at 10% of a number. There's a similarity between 54 and 5.4. The only thing we've done here is we've moved the decimal over once to the left. Okay. So to find 10% of a number, all we do is move the decimal place over once to the left. So 10% of 100, move my decimal place over, is 10. 10% of 9, move my decimal place over here, 9/10. And so on and so forth. Okay. If we look even further, if we wanted to find 1% of a number, instead of moving the decimal place over once, for 10%, finding 1% of a number, we just move the decimal once, twice. So 10% of 54 is 54 hundredths. 1% of 42 is 42 hundredths. And 1% of 100 is 1. And so on and so forth. So this really helps us, especially when we're estimating. Okay? Let's take a look at estimating. When we estimate, we want to keep in mind 10% of a number, 50% of a number, which is also known as half of something. It's very easy for us to cut something in half. And then 100% of a number, which is all of it, which is the whole. So think about it this way. What's 100% of 5? Well, 100% means all of it. So all of 5 is 5 itself. So when we estimate 45% of 50, I know my answer is going to be about 25 because I know that half of 50 or 50% of 50 is 25. So my answer should be a little bit less than 25. 20% of 8, well, 20% is closer to 10%, and I know 10% of 8 is 8/10. In fact, a quick trick here, if I take 10% and add another 10%, that gives me 20%. That's just a quick trick. Okay. And so on and so forth. So we've done these in class. When you're estimating, think about 10% of a number, half of a number, and all of it. Let's go on and take a look at an example. The bill for lunch is $22. How much money should you leave for a 20% tip? So there's two strategies. You could use the 10% trick, or we can just multiply. What we're looking for here, if we're going to leave a 20% tip on $22, we're looking for what is 20% of 22. So here is the multiplying rule. We are going to change our percent to a decimal. So 20% as a decimal is 0.2. Of in math means to multiply. And then my price isn't changing. My lunch is staying the same. Okay. So to find the answer here, I'm multiplying 2/10 times 22. I'm going to put my significant digits on top. 22 has more significant digits than 2/10. Okay. So that's why I'm putting it on top. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4. I have one decimal place behind, I have one place value behind the decimal. So I'm going to move my decimal over once. So if I'm going to leave a 20% tip on lunch, that's $22. My tip is going to be $4.40. We could take a look at this another way. Let me just clear this off real quick. If we were going to use our 10% trick, well, 10% of 22, we just learned that to find 10% of a number, we take my decimal and we move it once to the left. So if 2.2 is 10%, and here's another 2.2, which is another 10%. 10% and 10% gives me 20%. So if I add these, I have lined up my decimals, I have 4.4, which is exactly the same answer that we got before. Okay. All right, one more example. There are 25 socks in my drawer, and 40% of them are white. How many of my socks are white? So what we're looking for here is we want to find what is 40% of 25. Okay. You could definitely use that 10% trick. If not, we're going to change 40% to a decimal, which is 4/10 or 40/100, but this is 40/100 in more simple form. Of means to multiply, and we have 25. Okay, so 25 times 4/10. Notice we don't need to line up our decimals when we're multiplying decimal numbers. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 2 is 8. Plus 2 is 10. I have one place value behind the decimal, so I'm going to move my decimal over once. Okay. So how many of my socks are white? 10 socks are white. 10 socks are white. Okay. Great. Let's use my 10% trick. If I have 25, if 25 is my number, what's 10% of 25? Well, we move the decimal place over once. 2.5. 2.5 is 10%, and I'm looking for 40%. So I can multiply 2.5 times 4, or I can add 2.5 to itself 4 times, because that's 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. Okay, this one takes a little more time. Either way, you are going to get the same answer. You're going to get 10 each time. Okay? All right, thank you for watching my review video on finding the percent of a number. Talk to you later.